Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a Friday Reads and will probably be my penultimate book batch reviews of the year. There may be a second, it depends how much reading I get done basically. I'm now on annual leave, so I don't have to sort of eke out time to read from work and writing and stuff. I will be writing as well, but there'll be at least one more video specifically reviewing books, maybe two, as I say, and there will definitely be an end of year sort of top 10 kind of thing with my reading stats. So on to the books I've read in the last period. Leyla Erbil, What Remains, and this is translated by four translators: Alev Ersan, Amy Maria Spangler and Mark David Wires. Sorry, three translators. There are a couple of double-barreled names in there, which threw me, my counting abilities. Viktor Pelevin, Babylon, which was in America was called Generation P, and I think in Russia was called something different, Homo Sapiens with the Z instead of an S. So a lot of Pelevin's titles changed. The Clay Machine Gun in England was called something else in America. I don't really understand why, but anyway. And this was translated from the Russian by Andrew Bromfield. Viktor Pelevin, Babylon. Paul West, The Place in Flowers Where Pollen Rests. Solvej, Balle, On the Calculation of Volume, Volume 3. Just came out last month. It's translated from the Danish by Sophia Hersey-Smith and Jennifer Russell. Can't imagine really how two translators could work on a single book. Obviously they have to maybe they split it up and then come together and kind of review and critique each other's work. Anyway, Ilse Aichinger, Bad Words. Was an Austrian writer, and this is translated by Uljana Wolf and Christian Hawkey. So again, two translators. Gary Amdahl's new book called The Creative Writers. And finally some poetry. Terror Counter by Palestinian poet and performance artist Fargo Nissim Tbakhi. I hope I'm pronouncing that surname right. Okay, so let's start with Leyla Erbil's What Remains. And having read this, I realised, as you probably all know, I don't like biographies and I don't like the concept of autofiction, and I've got a video on why, and I'll post my link to that. But if I have to suffer the notion of a memoir, even one done through fiction like this is, I've realised that I like biographies that are not only about the character at the centre, but also about place, about countries. So things like Annie Ernaux's The Years, which is the biography of her growing up in post-war France, but also the biography of France. And this is similar. This is about its main character, who may or may not be Leyla Erbil, I don't know. But it's also about the history of modern Turkey, post-war Turkey, although there are lots of references to pre-post-war Turkey. So what's it about? So it's set in Constantinople, where the main female character lives in a diverse city that has obviously Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, people from the Balkans, and in her childhood, which she remembers, it was very peaceable and everyone got on and traded with each other. Her best friend was a Jewish girl. But increasingly, as she grows up, we get the sort of post-war history of Turkey where there were all sorts of massacres and crackdowns and terror, state-inspired terror. So the Greek community were turned on by the Turks out of sort of nationalist drive. We had crackdown on communism. So the beauty of the language here, I mean, I don't know if she was a poet, but it reads very poetically. And that persists despite the fact that the second half of this novel you get increasingly lists of names, and there's a sort of section of footnotes at the end that explains who these people were. Basically, people who were either executed or assassinated, and the context for which that is. So despite that, which sort of gives you sort of flashbacks of Bolano's chapter about the dead women in 2666, the difference I feel between that, the treatment in that, and the treatment in here is this remains poetic and this remains focused. That seemed to be Bolano's tactic, to me anyway, seemed to be just to sort of batter you into concussion through the sheer volume of murder victim after murder victim after murder victim. Not dissimilar here, but the poetic and the lyricism and the context is retained throughout. So I just thought it was a supreme piece of writing. As she grows up into an adult, she's caught in a love triangle, but both men are aware of each other. Indeed, they were best friends before. And while it's not an easy acceptance, they both sort of do accept the situation. So it's written as from the viewpoint of her character as an old woman, basically sort of on her deathbed, being fed pills to keep her alive, but which she sees as to stop all these thoughts pulsing and thudding through her head constantly that won't leave her alone, which is the bulk of the book, are those thoughts. And as I say, I just thought it was fabulous. It not only did it remind me of Annie Ernaux's The Years, it reminded me of Carol Mazo's Ava, but it also reminded me, strangely, even though it doesn't really share anything direct in terms of ideas, of Femme by Magda Carnaccia, a Romanian writer, so geographically not too far removed, which was one of my favourite books of the year I read it, and I'll post my link to it. So just, books that I really admire, and Ernaux's The Years. I don't have enough fingers to hold 4 books up. So this has muscled, no, not that one, sorry. This has rather muscled its way into my little mini pantheon of women writers who I think do quite extraordinary things in the books that I've just held up, and, won't kowtow to, fashion or the literary world. They hold their position as women and get it down on the page. 5 stars. Viktor Pelevin, Babylon. So this is possibly the last one of his books that I hadn't read. He has a new, he has a book out called KGBT, which I think is quite a clever title, but it's not translated. Now, I don't know if that's to do with the whole sanctions against Russia thing, which, if it is, I respect. But if it isn't, if it's just a sort of a market decision or whatever, I can't understand it, because Pelevin just never lets you down. I recently did a sort of retrospective on his book Snuff, which is one of the funniest novels I've ever read. And from there, I launched into a discussion of my observations on the Ukraine war, because Snuff predicted it. Snuff was first written in 2011, so before even the annexation of Crimea, and seemed to be very prescient of what this war has become, which is a sort of a testing ground for weapons and sort of a marketplace for countries to sell weapons to each other and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, I'll post a link to that video if you're interested. It's about 10 minutes on the book, and then the other, I don't know how long it is, 20 minutes is my observations on the war. Anyway, that's nothing to do with this book other than it was written by Viktor Pelevin, who, as I say, has never let me down. This is fabulous. This is set in the time of Boris Yeltsin, when Russia has thrown off the yoke of communism and is turning towards the West and free market capitalism, but it's not an easy transition. And the main character here is an advertising guy. Most of the adverts that he's involved with are all for Western products. They're not Russian products, because as we know today, Russia doesn't really produce that much. It's a sort of natural resources economy plus a military industrial complex, and there's not much else going on between. But this is so funny, so brilliantly satirical. And the other thing about Pelevin is he's a Buddhist. He's a practicing Buddhist. So Buddhist ideas often come into his work, and indeed they do here. So he knows he's got this vision, and the adverts that he comes up with are very funny, very satirical. They're very off kilter, where he's borrowing from high culture, from literature, but also from low culture, from visual images. He's making connections between things that no one else has connected. But Pelevin writes in a really satirical, hard sort of biting satire way. But he knows that he's sort of grasping after something that he hasn't quite got to. And he uses various ways of trying to get to this vision, to this point that he knows is out there, but he's not attained yet. So he'll do things like take magic mushrooms. He takes LSD. He communes with a mixture of sort of the Buddha meets Che Guevara, who's this sort of figure sort of talking to him during his sort of acid trip. He uses a Ouija board. So there are all these ways he's trying to effectively expand his consciousness in order to reach the cosmic truth that he can dimly perceive that's out there but can't quite reach. And as he's doing this, he's rising up the sort of hierarchy in advertising as his bosses lose their position, lose their status, or are indeed killed, because it is a bit of a sort of a gangster free-for-all capitalism. He manages always to sort of rise to the next stage and get promoted, and I won't spoil the ending, but that's the sort of, the ending is about the apotheosis of that plot line of his sort of rise to, through the ranks, as it were. But it's really about the satire, in criticising Russia. He's also criticising Western capitalism. He's pulling no punches, and the writing is just very, very spot on. So I'm going to read you a couple of bits. So this is in his sort of Buddhist Che Guevara vision, for want of a better word. This discipline regards each individual as a cell of an organism that the economists of the ancient world knew as mammon. In the educational materials of the Front for Full and Final Liberation, it is called simply Uranus, which translates into Russian as mouth arse. This more accurately reflects its real nature and leaves less scope for mystical speculation. Each of these cells, that is, each individual, when regarded as an economic entity, possesses a kind of social membrane that allows money, which plays the role of blood and lymph in the organism of Uranus, to pass into and out of the cell. From the point of view of economics, the function of each of these cells is to absorb as much money as possible through this membrane and to release as little as possible back through it. But the imperative of Uranus's existence as a whole requires its circular structure to be bathed in a constantly increasing stream of money. Therefore, Uranus, in the process of its evolution, and it is located at a level of evolution close to that of a mollusk, develops a primitive nervous system, the so-called media. This nervous system transmits throughout its virtual organism impulses that control the activity of the monadic cells. That vision, as I say, of Buddha meets Che Guevara goes on for about 10 pages, and it's so on point. It sort of nails capitalism, desire, advertising, consumerism, objects, all this sort of thing. This was terrific. I enjoyed, from page one to the end. I mean, I did think the end was a bit sort of plot bound, but I'm never that bothered about endings, so it didn't disappoint me. It was just a bit ho-hum. Whereas the rest of the book, I was just a wild ride, thoroughly enjoyable. 5 stars. And on to The Place in Flowers Where Pollen Rests, which is the name of a Native American who carves dolls out of wood. Many of them are divinities. And so he not only spreads them around his tribe on the reservation in Arizona, but he's also selling them to tourists. So the sort of the sacred and the profane, as it were. He has a nephew who in the first, so this is in four sections, of which section 2 and 3 are much longer than section 1 and 4. His nephew is a porn star working in California. And one of the girls that he's doing a scene with dies during the shoot. seemingly at his hands. It's never sort of clearly stated whether he's killed her or not. And he sort of feels a mixture, obviously, of guilt, but also the need for self-preservation. So he flees back to the reservation in Arizona. So part one is his life. As I say, it's quite short, but it's very well written. It's very punchy about his life as a porn star in California. Part two is him back on the reservation, and our sort of a wonderful cast of characters is portrayed. And he goes and lives with this uncle. He doesn't live with him, but he basically looks after him because the uncle has no one else who's prepared to do it. And it's very much the uncle is not only approaching death but welcoming death. He's just waiting for it. He's not hanging on. He doesn't want to hang on. He wants to go as soon as possible. And this nephew keeps doing things because he's got this money secreted away from his sort of porn career that no one knows about. He keeps sort of buying him things, be it the sort of medicines and medical treatment, or be it sort of a radio, so he's sort of not lonely, all this sort of stuff. And so there's this sort of tension because the uncle wants to die, but the nephew's actually keeping him alive effectively. And it's just a really interesting take. I mean, Paul West is English, so he has no links to sort of First Nation. Native Americans. He did move to America and live the rest of his life there, but he himself has no sort of heritage. And I think he pulls it off quite well, I have to say. And then part three, the uncle has died, and then the nephew has joined I don't know if he's joined the army in Vietnam, or he's been enlisted. Sorry, I don't know whether he's enlisted or conscripted, get my medical terms right. So it's a very long sort of section of his experiences in Vietnam, where he sort of stands out as a Native American from the rest of the guys. And I've read a lot of writing on Vietnam, and most of it doesn't really rise above any other bits. There are one or two, but I mean, Tim O'Brien's work is head and shoulders above most. This I thought was pretty good. This was interesting enough to be different, I felt, maybe because of the character of a Native American's experience in Vietnam. And there's lots of good writing about his mental state and how it's increasingly sort of deracinated. As he's we now call it PTSD. I mean, I don't think it had a name back in those days. And then we go to section 4, where he's been honourably discharged, the war's over, he's back on the reservation, but of course his uncle's no longer there, his uncle's dead. And I felt that this section 4 was, again, it's not overly long, but I felt this was the weakest section because it didn't quite seem to be as tight and as focused as the others, where he himself can't place himself back in society, be it American society or be it Native American society. After the Vietnam experience, it all feels totally alien to him. And he sort of gets involved in the sort of annual Native American rituals and stuff. But as I say, the energy, I think, of the Vietnam section just sort of dribbled away in the fourth part. But I thought throughout it was pretty gripping. It was, well written, but written in such a way to propel you through the pages. I mean, it's quite a dense book. It's a long book, 500 pages or something. But until, as I said, maybe the fourth section, it doesn't let you go. It keeps propelling you forward. So I gave it 4.5 stars. And on to the calculation of volume by Solvej Balle. So I'll post my link to the review of Volume 2 from earlier this year, where I suppose I've undertaken quite a curious stance in that I didn't want to read Volume 1 because it just sounded like a Groundhog Day thing to me. So I started with Volume 2, which I found, intriguing enough that I wanted to go on, because there's 7 volumes of this. And I said that if I got to read the other 6 volumes, I would go back and read Volume 1 just for the sake of completion, if nothing else. So I thought there was enough in Volume 2, and again, I'll post my link to it. So we come to Volume 3, which picks up where Volume 2 left off. So I said it was Groundhog Day. So this character finds herself reliving, she's stuck on the same day, which was the 18th of November or the 19th. I think it's the 18th of November. And what was interesting about volume 2 was all the sort of mental gymnastics of trying to deal with that, where one of the things she does is she misses, because it's always the same day in November, she misses the changing of the seasons. So what she does is she travels up and down Europe to even though wherever she is, it's the 19th of November for her. At least she can mimic a different season. She goes to Spain, 19th of November, it'll still be sunny. If she goes to Norway, it'll be Christmassy, all this sort of stuff. So it was very much focused on her. And that book ended where she works out that there's someone else who's stuck in the same day as her. And the two of them get together. That's the end of volume 2. So volume 3 picks up from that, where it's the two of them together, trying to understand. Now it's sort of become doubled. There's two of them. And I was in two minds about this, because where they're exploring the paradoxes and the logical issues thrown up by being stuck in the same day, day after day after day, I thought it was still on point like volume 2 had been. But equally, he lectures her about how history is made by men, dominated by men, and goes into a whole spiel about it. And she challenges him on it, and he sort of says, well, I'm doing it to sort of protect you and sort of apologise. I'm sort of apologising for the fact that women aren't more prominent in sort of making history, by which I don't mean female academics. I mean the names we all learn about at school are all men, pretty much. One or two exceptions like Cleopatra and Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria. I just thought that was unnecessary. I couldn't see the point of it at all. And it was very much a lecture on his part, and seemed to have nothing to do with their dilemma other than the fact that she had come out of an obsession with Roman history in volume 2, which is fine, but I couldn't see how that jumped to him lecturing her. I mean, they actually met at a university attending a lecture, and she realised that he did something different the second time on November the 19th, so she figured out that he was like to be in the same dilemma as her. And then they basically tracked down that there's two other people also stuck in November the 18th. And this is where the book lost it for me, really, because the main character doesn't really have an opinion of what's behind this. She had hoped that after 1 year she would return to normal and get back into time's flow. That didn't happen. But she doesn't really have a theory. She's more about just sort of coping with it and dealing with it and eking out some sort of quality of life. The first guy she met up with thinks that what's happened to them is a signal of a crack in reality, that this is the beginning of the collapse of reality, the collapse of consciousness, of cosmic consciousness, or whatever. The two that they hook up with sort of halfway through the book, the male of it is absolutely motivated by the fact that on that 18th of November, wherever they are, people die in unnecessary accidents. And what he wants to do is get the message to them that to stop them taking that car journey where they have an accident, or not going to work where they have an accident on the machinery, whatever it is. And he's obsessed with doing this, but he realizes that in order to do this, they're going to have to set up some sort of mechanism which repeats the message each 18th of November, which I will come back to, because I think there's a logical flaw there. Whereas the female says, no, that's all about individuals. What we've been given the chance here by sort of reliving the same day and having knowledge of that day is more political, that there's lots of injustices and how governments, act iniquitously to their populations. That's the level we should be active and agitating on, not the level of individual accidents. So there's a sort of ideological split there. None of this I found advanced the book at all. I did think the first guy who thought that this was a sign of a crack of reality and that it might all sort of collapse inwards. There's potential there, and maybe later books deal with it. I don't know. But the addition of these two characters, so suddenly we've gone from volume two's intense single focus of this woman on getting through the 19th, 18th of November, day after day after day in different places, seeing the same things in the ambience around her, because those people are living the 18th of November for the first and only time. That focus just conjured up so much sort of thought and sort of provocation. I thought was great. And now we've got four characters who all suffer the same sort of stuckness, but all react very differently to it, which I felt diluted the strength from focus of volume two. And I didn't feel this book added anything really to it. And before I go on to sort of draw my conclusions about the series so far, the guy who's obsessed with saving people from accidental deaths, what he doesn't realise, because we'd had the example of, in volume two, of the woman artificially recreating seasonal movement by going to different places in Europe. He's talking about setting up some sort of device that every day will warn these people not to do it, because I guess he thinks he's living in a multiverse or a parallel universe setup, whereby in their reality, all these accidents happen, but there are other alternative realities where that can be prevented, but no one else knows that they're living in those alternative realities. It didn't make sense to me, because if he was moving around from town to town to town, establishing, from newspaper records and library records and death records, all the accidents in the town on that 18th of November, and did it for every town he visited, that makes sense. And he wouldn't have to do the machine to repeat, because for everyone that he's saving, they only lived November the 18th once, and then the next day is the 19th for them. So if he saved their life and they're still alive on the 18th, there doesn't need to be any repetition. So what he's saying is he's going to set up this machine because he's staying in one place. But that makes it solipsistic in a way, because if he just moved on to another town, he wouldn't have to worry. Those people will be safe for another 20, 30, 40 years, however, to their natural deaths. But he's not. He's saying, I'm going to save them every day, every one of our November the 18th. This machine will churn out the warnings, save these people's lives. But they wouldn't have to if he wasn't there. It's only him being there, like God, that means that these people need saving day after day after day. Because every day for him is the 18th. It isn't for the people he's saving. So that really didn't work for me. So where does that leave me? Well, I'm 1-1. Volume 2 I liked. Volume 3 I really didn't like. I've given this 2.5 stars. I feel I need to read volume 4 to sort of adjudicate on whether I continue all the way to volume 7 or not. If I like volume 4, then I'll carry on. If I don't, I don't think I can be bothered with 5, 6 and 7. Is the material too thinly spread? Is the ideas that she's exploring too thinly spread? I don't know. I mean, maybe by volume 7 you've got this huge sort of mosaic of all the ideas wrapped into each other. That's possible, but do I have the patience for it? I don't know. So yeah, really disappointing. 2.5 stars. And on to Ilse Aichinger, Bad Words. So Ilse Aichinger was a post-war poet, and she wrote a couple of volumes of short stories, of which this is one. It's called Bad Words because she herself says that she often chooses the wrong word, the inappropriate word, the word you're not expecting, rather than a literary word or a high concept word. So the first section of this is sort of rural tales, so very much the sort of, rustic, boots and braces kind of themes of her poetry. But when you're talking in terms of choosing the wrong word as a deliberate decision, I immediately go to Ben Marcus, who wrote books like The Age of Wire and String, which explores that. But there's an absolute chasm of difference, and I think interest between what Marcus does and what she does. So in The Age of Wire and String, you're not really given any information as to why you're getting all these strange combination of words, which go on to form their own strange, beautiful poetry as it goes. But you get the sense that This is the human race being observed by an alien intelligence who have a dictionary, so they've got access to all our words. But what they don't have is the life experience and the sense perception to know how those words link together. So in the age of wire and string, think about one of the images that Marcus offers up, which is a swing made out of the frame, rope, and then a tyre. The tyre is the swing that the child sits on. So they know what a tyre is, and they know what rope is, and they know what a frame is, but they've got no idea that unless they see someone swinging on it, and even if they do, they'll come up with a strange interpretation of that. But if they don't see anyone swinging on it, they put together these three elements and they come up with sort of fantastic imaginings of what it is. And that works because the book basically, it's from the viewpoint of an alien intelligence or an alien perspective on our language, on our sense perception. So it's human beings being looked at from the outside. A lot of these poems have I. That's not necessarily Ilse Aichinger herself, but a first person. And the moment you do that, it takes away the alien perspective that Marcus uses. And I don't think it works. Where there are poems where the I isn't present, it has more chance. But we're not because this is short stories, it's not bound in, by an overall sort of narrative framework and point of reference. It doesn't really work at all for me. And I was hugely disappointed in this. I'm going to give you an example. So this is a short story called Queens. I'm just going to read the first paragraph. This is the start of the story, okay? So you don't know what you're getting into, and this is what you're sort of hurled into for the first paragraph. Kindred spirits finally accomplished. The viruses of vertigo stringing themselves together. Uses my wife for sewing. The chainmail shirt grows. Soon it can be hooked on. The legend itself an instruction for reading. A sewing thread for the immortals, for their fragile fingers. Slipping away, unthread the needle. No, not like that. In a minute. We'll find each other again. We are complete. Here, yes, here. We're screwed up in Virginia, but we are still here. That's all one sentence. There's no punctuation. Well, there's dashes, but there's no real punctuation. I mean, I have no idea what it's about, what that's supposed to lead me into. I think the chainmail was a metaphor that came back. And she does do that quite a lot, that these very strange elements, which seem totally out of place when they're introduced, do get referred back to and stuff, which does echo Marcus's work a bit. But I'm afraid I didn't get on with this at all. This is a message to Bob Black, one of my long-time subscribers. Bob, I'd be interested if you fancy reading this, because you might actually get something out of this. She's a poet, and what I just read and her writing in general is lyrical. So but there wasn't anything more than that for me. But I'd be interested to know if you do decide to take the plunge on this, whether you found more than just the lyrical poetry of it. So I'm afraid for me, 2.5 stars. And on to Gary Amdahl's latest book called The Creative Writers. So as befits the title, this takes a very funny, very satirical potshot at the creative writing industry, or as I like to call it, the literary industrial complex. So we have a character called George, who is non-tenured academic, and he's given a creative writing class in the new academic year. And he's has very sort of strong ideas about, that whole creative writing impetus in America, the whole MFA thing. So he's going to teach them in a different way. He's going to sort of make a play to sort of fire their imaginations rather than give them sort of set, rote rules. He's not about that at all. And the lessons that we're offered in here that he gives early on seemingly have very little to do with creative writing. So he's talking about the difference between, the one thing that art and writing in particular must aim at is dealing with violence, the violence in society. And one of the ways he goes on to illustrate this is what he calls a commedia dell'arte, which is an Italian stagecraft from the Renaissance, I think. He's got a custard pie, and he's going around his students, sort of threatening to throw it in each of their faces. So there's that sort of violence in the air, but it's not actual violence, it's threat. And in the end, he does shove it in the face of one of his female students. Whereupon he's hauled before the ethics committee of the professorial board, and we get a very funny to and fro between him representing his view and them representing the whole woke, not that's a word I really recognise, but the whole woke nature of academia for the student body, you know, in terms of sort of trauma and identity and all this sort of stuff. And basically he loses his job or he walks out, I can't remember now which, whereupon he goes on a bit of a magical adventure where a film is being made of this incident. And he's involved in sort of getting the film together, because obviously he was there, he knows what happens. But obviously the woman who he threw the pie in has her narrative, and that's going to be done in media and in film as well. And the sort of cast of characters include yin and yang, who are not only sort of two poles in art, not only light and dark, but two different poles in art. And there also have to be super talent agents as well. So that, you know, apart from George, the characters have lots of sort of different streams to their bow. He marries a woman called Anne, who is a film director who lives in a sort of James Bond villain type of labyrinth under the sea into a private island, and has wings. They have a daughter together who ages, you know, years in days. So there's that whole sort of telescoping of sort of wisdom thing. It's pretty mad. It's pretty out there, but it's quite entertaining. And the forces that they're up against is, as I say, this literary industrial complex, because the college from which he was fired, part of the reason they did what they did is because they're undergoing a process of corporatizing the creative writing service that they offer to make money, to get as many students in as possible. And also it becomes a cult. So it's spot on. But my one caveat is I'm a writer. So I get the gags. I get the targets that Gary's going for here, because even though I haven't done an MFA, I haven't done a creative writing course. But I do wonder, for non-writers who read this book, does that interest them? Now, it may do. I can't put myself in their position because I'm a writer. I can't take that out of myself. So I'd be interested to know in the comment. Well, no, because you need to read this book first. I suppose you could comment whether you'd be interested in reading a book about creative writing degrees. As I say, I have a gut feeling that not every reader is going to be interested in the minutiae that Gary and I and other writers, we fall upon like a vulture, because it's meat and drink to us. It's the world we move in, and those of us who aren't blessed, we attack MFAs, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what your views are. So I gave this 4.5 stars. And finally, some poetry. So this is Terror Counter by Palestinian Fargo, Nissim, Tbakhi. And there are three, it's a poetry collection, so there's good and bad in it. So I want to make sort of 3 points about it. The first is, towards the end, there's a really touching poem where it's about him and his father, who's, sort of nearing death, that when he himself looks in the mirror, he sees his father's face staring back at him, not because it's his father, but it's the father in him genetically and stuff. So it's the sort of genetic inheritance, it's the other inheritance, such as, gestures that you sort of unconsciously mimic and mirror from your father, but also it's the cultural inheritance, because they're Palestinian, and the one thing they definitively share is their exile from their homeland. I just thought that was a terrific poem. Another poem here called Craw. Let's see if I can find it. I also ought to say there's some really intriguing visual poems about the tunnels under, is it Gaza? Sort of half word cloud, half visual poetry. There's a series of them which are really, really sort of quite powerful. So I'm going to look up in the index where this poem is that I wanted to read. Yeah, it's called Craft Talk, and the craft he's referring to is the craft of writing poetry, but really powerful. So you can imagine him sat at his table trying to compose a poem. The first image, a little girl's body pulled out of the rubble. I strike from the poem, let her rest. Language is a failed state. The second image, my own body stripped and hung by my fingers, less their nails, piled neatly on a nearby table. I keep. The poem is a space to rehearse for the future. The third image, a dictum of power, something like the state is, or the Guggenheim winning poet is. This I soften and blur. In my weakest moments, I still succumb to the desire for a book deal and avoid threatening its keepers. The fourth image, rubble alone, pulled from the mouth of my body, hanging from a hook in the black site. This image I widen so it envelops the entire page, yellow bile coating the margins. I'm interested in frightening you. I do not want to be alone anymore. The fifth image, a drone giving birth to a child with gold leaf on its fingernails. I wipe the mucus off, I give it a name. At the edge of the poem, the baby slouches towards Jerusalem. When it crosses the border, the poem can no longer see it. The drone child becomes an imagined condition the poem has released into the world. I do not know what it intends. I do not know what it will eat. The sixth image, my father, dragged into the poem against his will once more. I suspend him here with me. I revel in our togetherness. His nails join mine. Our backs are cut. Our eyes plucked out. The cruelty of jailers infected my language. Everything I love I turn to cruelty. The poem now is just another cell. All I know is how to write as dead. Inside this image I reach out my little toe and touch the image of my father's little toe. The state is crueler than your poem could ever be. I make the poem make my father say. So I think that's an incredible poem. I mean, obviously it's about the sort of anger and rage of being Palestinian, but it's much more intricate than that, because it's about how do you put that in a poem? Do you go route one and basically write almost political slogans? Or do you make it personal, in which case the political stuff might, if it's about your private emotions and stuff, the political stuff might not be quite so obvious. But there's a whole range. There's also the strange image that seems to come from nowhere and have no internal logic, and yet resonate with power, such as a drone giving birth to a child with gold leaf on its fingernails. The drone child becomes an imagined condition the poem has released into the world. I do not know what it intends. I do not know what it will eat. So even the poet, doesn't know where this comes from, but is prepared to go with it. He's going to keep that bit. The first part is he wrote the image of fallen rubble and a little girl crushed beneath it. And he says, no, I can't put that in a poem. It's dishonouring her somehow. It's reducing her to art and metaphor, and that, so there's this whole spectrum of what he can put in a poem, what's good to put in a poem, what's poetic, and also what's potentially dishonourable, exploitative. And I just think that poem just brilliantly encapsulate that. The third point I wanted to make is the middle section is first of all, it's all caps, and it's set in my mind that this was a performance art piece. I don't know if it was, but that's what it came over as. I thought it was by far the weakest of the rest of the poems in this book, and it seemed to be a poem that needed to be vocalised, which I didn't do myself, but it needed to be performed by the poet's performance artist himself. And I felt just on the page it lacked for that. And even if I had read it out, I think it would have been better in his voice. So I'm not sure it sat very comfortably and very well with the rest of the poems, which were poems as poems. This seemed to be part poetry, part performance. And you don't get the performance coming off the page, unfortunately. But all in all, I thought it was a pretty decent collection, 4 stars. So there you have it. Just a quick recap. What Remains, Leyla Erbil, 5 stars. Viktor Pelevin, Babylon, 5 stars. Paul West, The Place in Flowers Where Pollen Rests, 4.5 stars. On the Calculation of Volume, 2.5 stars. Ilse Eichinger's Bad Words, 2.5 stars. The Creative Writers, Gary Amdahl, 4.5 stars. And Terror Counter Poetry by Fargo, Nissim, Tbakhi, 4 stars. So there you have it. Thanks very much. Till next time.